Welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at something I find really fascinating. It's the unique journey of first-generation Indian immigrants and raising their children here in the U.S. It's a story that goes way beyond just typical parenting
Yeah, it
challenges.
really is. I mean, you're talking about weaving together two very distinct cultures, the rich heritage of India and then sort of the fast-paced lifestyle that we have here in America. And that's what makes the source material so compelling for this deep dive.
Yeah. So we're diving into a book written by a couple who did just that. They raised two kids here in the US while navigating, this complex cultural blend. They're sharing their personal story, their struggles, their triumphs, and ultimately they even offer some insightful advice for other parents who might be in similar situations.
Yeah, and one of the things that really stood out to me right away was their honesty about their initial feelings of isolation when they first came here. As new parents in a foreign country, I mean, think about it. New place, new people. Often you don't have that traditional family support system that you would have back home. It's a huge adjustment.
Yeah, it is. It makes you realize how much we actually rely on those support systems.
Yeah.
They actually talk about turning to online resources like Baby Center for guidance.
hmm
But even then, they felt this disconnect because a lot of the advice was coming from, a predominantly Western perspective.
Yeah, they were constantly trying to reconcile that advice with their own Indian values and practices. Like when it came to things like sleep training or even introducing solid foods. For example, they mentioned how Baby Center would recommend these sleep training methods that they felt were too harsh compared to their cultural norm of co-sleeping or responding immediately to the baby's cries.
It's that constant push and pull, isn't it? Honoring your heritage, but also adapting to this whole new parenting landscape. And it wasn't just about the kids either.
Right.
They really emphasize that even before you think about being a good parent, you need to focus on yourself and your marriage.
It's true. You need a solid foundation. It's
Yeah.
like building a house. You can't build the walls and the roof if you don't have a solid foundation.
Hmm.
And they talk about the intense pressure that newlywed couples face when they immigrate, you know, culture shock, financial strain, the language barrier, all of those things can really take a toll.
And the homesickness too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And the limited communication with their loved ones back home.
Yeah.
I mean, they could only afford to call their families in India like a couple times a month. And even then, it was just for a few minutes each time. Can you imagine how isolating that must have felt?
Really adds another layer of complexity to their story. It's
Yeah.
not just about raising children, it's about building a whole new life in a foreign country.
Right.
And in that process, education becomes a central theme.
Yeah, right. In Indian culture, education is seen as the pathway to success. It's upward mobility, it's a brighter future. So naturally, they were determined to support their children's educational journey here in the U.S.
Yeah. And they had to navigate this completely different system. They describe their own early education as being very academically focused, with rote memorization being the primary way of learning. Creativity and self-expression were not exactly encouraged. They even share that this lack of early exposure to things like arts and crafts made them feel less confident in tasks requiring dexterity later in life.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So when they saw the emphasis on nurturing creativity and imagination in early childhood education here in the U.S., it was a bit of an eye-opener.
What?
They realized their children might be missing out on opportunities to develop that creative side, and they really made a conscious effort to incorporate things like arts and crafts into their lives at home.
Yeah, they wanted to make sure that their children had multiple avenues to express themselves, not just academically. They actually explained that this came from, not just wanting to foster their kids' development, but also a very practical understanding that sometimes, without outlets for their imagination, children can, resort to pushing boundaries and testing their patience.
Fascinating. It really shows how they were adapting their parenting approach, like based on observation and their understanding of child development.
Right.
It wasn't about rigidly sticking to one cultural norm or another.
Exactly. And speaking of those cultural nuances, a big part of their journey was about finding this delicate balance between preserving their Indian heritage and then also embracing American culture.
Uh-huh. They talk about the importance of celebrating Indian festivals even though they aren't widely recognized holidays here. They wanted their children to experience the joy, the traditions of Ganesh Chaturthi, Dussehra, Diwali, all these vibrant celebrations that are such a huge part of Indian culture.
And it wasn't just about the festivals either. They made a conscious effort to incorporate traditional Indian customs and values into their daily lives, passing them down through everyday interactions and those family milestones like birthdays and weddings.
In language, too, right?
Absolutely.
They talk about how important it was to maintain their native language at home because they saw it as like a vital link to their heritage, a way to pass down stories and cultural nuances and family history.
And they made it fun.
Yeah.
They mentioned watching cartoons and movies in their native language with their children, turning language learning into this shared family experience.
That's a great way to keep those traditions alive.
It really is. And it brings up this really interesting point that they make about respecting their children's individual choices as they grow. For example, they discuss the tradition of the bindi. It's a decorative mark worn on the forehead by many Indian women. And they introduced their daughter to its significance early on, but ultimately respected her decision about whether or not to wear it as she got older.
It's a subtle but powerful example of how they tried to balance honoring tradition with allowing their children to develop their own identities within, this new cultural context.
Yeah.
And this mindful approach, it extended to their views on health and well-being as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They were very proactive about their children's physical health, emphasizing exercise, play, a balanced diet, good hygiene, all those foundational habits. Regular checkups with the pediatrician and dentist were non-negotiable.
Sounds like they were very intentional about establishing a good relationship with those healthcare providers, which can be really challenging when you're navigating a new system in a new country.
Oh, yeah, for sure. They also talk about the importance of emotional well-being, recognizing that it's just as crucial as physical health. They even mentioned seeking professional support when they felt it was needed, from a child psychologist, the school counselor. They weren't afraid to reach out for help.
Which really highlights their willingness to adapt and seek help when needed. They weren't afraid to step outside those traditional norms if it meant providing the best possible support for their kids.
Exactly. And they were very conscious of the social and emotional challenges that children might face, particularly navigating things like, discussions about family life and health education in schools.
Yeah.
And actually, they even talk about facing differing opinions amongst other immigrant parents regarding things like sex education. Some felt that it was, inappropriate to discuss at a young age, while others, like themselves, saw the value in open communication, and believed it would help their children make informed decisions later on.
It's a sensitive topic, especially when you're trying to reconcile cultural values with the realities of American society. But their approach highlights their commitment to, raising well-rounded individuals who are equipped to handle the complexities of life in this new cultural setting.
For sure. And so we've seen how they've tackled these early challenges and built this incredibly strong foundation for their family. But now, comes the real test, navigating the U.S. school system.
Yeah, that's a whole other beast.
It is. And that's where things get even more interesting, From choosing between public and private schools to understanding completely different teaching methods, they had a whole new world to figure out. And that's exactly what we're going to be exploring in part 2 of this deep dive.
Stay with us. We'll delve into their experiences with the American education system, from elementary school all the way to college. It's a journey you won't want to miss. Okay, so we're back and ready to continue our deep dive into this fascinating world of first-generation Indian immigrants raising their kids here in the U.S. Last time we were talking about all the challenges they faced adapting to a new culture and just establishing that solid foundation for their family.
Right.
Now, let's get into their experience with the American education system, which, as you can imagine, was a pretty steep learning curve for them.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was a completely different landscape compared to what they were used to in India. Their own education had been so rooted in rote learning and memorization, exams were like the main focus, and there really wasn't much emphasis on things like critical thinking or creative expression.
So when they encountered the American system with its focus on participation and project-based learning and,
Oh, yeah.
the whole concept of showing your work, it must have been a bit of a shock.
Yeah, definitely a culture shock.
Yeah.
They really had to sort of adjust their own understanding of what even makes a good education and learn how to, support their children within this totally new framework. And one of the first big decisions they had to make was, public school or private school.
Right, which is a dilemma for a lot of parents, regardless of background. But for them, it was even more complicated because they weren't familiar with all the nuances of each system.
They dedicate a whole section of the book to weighing the pros and cons. They were drawn to the sense of community and diversity in public schools. And, of course, the fact that they're free is huge for many families. But they were also aware that the quality can vary so much depending on funding, resources, all of that, which, can be tied to the specific neighborhood or district.
Absolutely. And actually, they ended up moving to a different school district just to ensure their kids had access to better resources and opportunities.
Wow. Yeah, that shows real commitment.
Yeah.
It highlights just how much importance they placed on education.
Mm.
But, they also acknowledge the advantages of private schools, like the smaller class sizes, the more individualized attention. So it's a trade-off.
It is. It's a trade-off, and often one that comes with a hefty price tag, which is not feasible for every family. But beyond just like the logistical stuff, what I found really interesting was their observation of the different teaching methods used in India versus here in the US, particularly when it comes to reading and writing.
Oh, yeah. They contrast the American emphasis on phonics, which focuses on those sound-letter relationships, building those decoding skills, with the Indian focus on rote memorization of letters and words. They even share this anecdote about their daughter struggling initially with phonics because she was so used to just memorizing the spellings of words. But once she got it, her reading fluency took off.
Oh, wow.
It's a great example of how they had to adapt their own understanding of learning and help their kids bridge that gap between two very different approaches.
Right. And it's not just reading. I mean, even math lessons, they're structured differently. In India, there's a huge emphasis on memorizing formulas and procedures, while here in the US, there's more focus on understanding the underlying concepts and applying them to like real-world problem solving.
It's much more of like a conceptual approach versus just purely procedural. And they even admit that while, rote learning can be effective for memorizing things, it doesn't necessarily foster that deeper understanding or critical thinking.
And as their kids progressed through the American system, they started to notice how the curriculum really emphasized like analysis, critical thinking, the application of knowledge, like even with reading comprehension, it went beyond just recalling facts.
Right.
It was about analyzing the characters' motivations, predicting plot twists, forming their own interpretations of the text.
Yeah, it's all about developing those higher order thinking skills that are so valued in the American system.
Mm-hmm. But their journey wasn't just about academics.
Yeah.
They also had to figure out how their own parenting style and values fit within this new context.
They talk about consciously shifting away from that more traditional Indian parenting style that often emphasizes, criticism and punishment for mistakes. Instead, they really focused on positive reinforcement, acknowledging and appreciating their children's efforts and good behavior.
And they noticed that this approach created like a more positive learning environment.
Yeah.
It encouraged their kids to take risks without that fear of failure.
Yeah. And they share this really heartwarming story about their son, who was about 4 years old at the time. He saw his baby sister crying, and without even being asked, he brought her a cup of water.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Right. They realized that those little acts of kindness were more meaningful than any academic achievement.
And they decided to really focus on nurturing those qualities.
Mm-hmm. Leading by example was also huge for them. They were very mindful of treating their children with respect, using please and thank you, even apologizing to their kids when they made mistakes.
It's about modeling the behavior that you want to see in your children.
Exactly.
And they also, emphasized celebrating their children's individual personalities and talents. They encouraged them to pursue their own passions without any preconceived expectations.
Which, that can be challenging for parents coming from cultures that place a strong emphasis on specific career paths, like, oh, you have to be a doctor or an engineer.
Right.
But they recognize that true fulfillment comes from pursuing your own interests,
Absolutely. And here's where it gets really interesting. They were big advocates for teaching financial literacy early on.
Mm-hmm.
They openly discussed family finances with their children, explaining things like budgeting, saving, responsible spending.
Which is a big departure from that traditional Indian approach of, shielding children from money matters.
Right.
But they felt it was important for their kids to understand the value of money and develop good habits from a young age.
Yeah, definitely. So we've seen them adapt to this new education system, evolve their parenting approach, instill those important values in their children.
Right.
But as their kids entered middle school, they encountered a whole new set of challenges.
Oh, for sure.
The social dynamics, peer pressure, the ever-complicated world of adolescence.
Yeah, and those teenage years brought their own hurdles.
Yeah.
From navigating, like, the complexities of the American grading system to guiding their kids through the college application process,
Oh my
which
gosh.
would be incredibly stressful.
I know.
And that's exactly where we'll pick up in part 3 of our deep dive.
Yes, stay tuned. We'll explore their experiences with middle school, high school, and the ultimate transition, preparing their kids for college and beyond. And we are back for the final part of our deep dive. It's been fascinating to explore the journey of these first-generation Indian immigrant parents raising their kids here in the U.S.
You really have.
I mean, we've seen them adapt to a whole new culture, embrace different parenting styles, and navigate, oh gosh, the complexities of the American education system.
Yeah.
But as their kids enter middle school,
Oh.
they hit this whole new set of challenges.
Absolutely. Middle school, it's such a time of transition. Those kids are figuring out who they are, testing boundaries, dealing with all those complicated social dynamics.
Oh, I remember those days.
Yeah.
Not easy.
And for parents, it's a real balancing act, right?
Mhm.
Giving them the independence they need, but still providing guidance and support.
Right. The authors talk about learning to let go a little, allowing their kids to make their own decisions and, yeah, even make mistakes.
It's so important. They realize that trying to control everything, especially during those middle school years, could totally backfire.
Kids need that space to figure things out, even if it means stumbling a bit along the way.
Exactly. And they had to adjust their own expectations, too. Remember, they come from a system where grades were primarily based on exams.
Right.
So this whole concept of weighted grades here in the U.S., where homework, class participation, projects, all those things factor into the final grade.
Right.
It was a big adjustment for them.
Yeah, it's much more of a holistic approach to assessment, isn't it?
It is. But it also means that parents need to be more involved in their kids' day-to-day schoolwork,
Right.
helping them manage their time, stay organized, meet deadlines.
And then you layer on the whole social aspect of middle school,
Yeah,
which, let's be honest, can be a minefield for any kid.
it really can.
The authors talk about navigating those choppy waters of friendships and cliques and peer pressure.
It's that age where social acceptance feels so important.
Everything's a drama.
Everything's a drama. Exactly.
They emphasize the importance of just keeping those lines of communication open,
Yes.
encouraging their kids to talk about what's going on in their social lives, good or bad.
Create that safe space where they feel comfortable coming to you.
Exactly.
It's not always easy, though.
No.
And they also talk about the challenges of moving, between school districts during middle school, which can be really disruptive socially.
Yeah, can you imagine trying to integrate into this established social scene when everyone already has their friend groups?
Tough.
Talk about awkward. But amidst all these social and academic hurdles, they still recognize the value of extracurricular activities.
Yeah, they saw firsthand how those activities could help their kids build confidence, make friends, develop new skills.
And their son was very involved in tennis and Boy Scouts.
Yeah, he even achieved the rank of Eagle Scout, which is
Yeah.
pretty impressive.
That's amazing.
And their daughter did Bollywood dance, Bharatanatyam, which is a classical Indian dance form, and she also played tennis.
So pretty full schedule.
They really embraced that part of American culture,
Mhm.
encouraging their kids to explore different interests, find their passions.
And then there's that whole other layer of guiding teenagers through those tricky waters of opposite gender attraction and friendships.
It's a whole other level, especially when you're trying to balance your own cultural upbringing with the social norms here in the U.S.
Right.
They talk about feeling a bit conflicted, wanting to give their kids the same guidance they received growing up,
Yeah.
but also recognizing that their kids were living in a completely different world.
It's about finding that balance again.
It is.
Respecting your children's autonomy, but still offering advice, setting boundaries.
Exactly. They highlight the importance of trust and open communication during those teenage years.
So important. And then, of course, comes high school, where everything shifts to college prep and preparing for gulp adulthood.
They had to learn about this whole new set of acronyms. AP classes, IB programs, the SATs, ACTs. It's enough to make anyone's head spin.
It really is. And they were determined to understand it all.
Yeah.
So they could help their kids through this, this crucial phase. They really dove headfirst into researching different colleges, understanding the application process, helping them prepare for those standardized tests that feel like, such high stakes.
Right. They even explored different test prep options, tried tutoring centers, but then realized that their kids actually thrived more with self-study.
Wow.
It really is about figuring out what works best for each individual child.
And they emphasize that college isn't just about grades and test scores.
No.
It's about finding the right fit for your child.
Yeah.
A place where they can thrive academically, socially, personally.
Exactly. They encourage their kids to visit different campuses, explore different majors, think about what kind of environment would be best for them.
And, of course, those college essays.
Yeah.
They encourage their kids to use those essays as a chance to really share their unique stories and let their personality shine through.
It's about standing out from the crowd.
But even with all this focus on academics and the future, they never lost sight of the importance of, basic life skills.
Right.
They made sure their kids knew how to do things like change a tire.
Important skill.
Oh, essential.
You never know when you're going to need that.
And they made sure their kids understood the importance of things like roadside assistance.
Yeah.
Not being afraid to ask for help.
And they instilled that sense of responsibility by involving their kids in household chores from a young age.
Right.
Cooking, cleaning, laundry, all of it.
It's about preparing them for that real world.
Yeah. Where all those seemingly little things really matter.
And finally, they talk about the importance of supporting their kids in exploring their career interests, finding their passions.
Yeah, encouraging them to think outside the box, consider all those different possibilities, and really just pursue whatever sparked their curiosity and enthusiasm.
It's a beautiful message. They came from a culture that often emphasizes, very specific career paths.
Right.
But they chose to empower their children to create their own definitions of success.
It's really beautiful. It speaks to their growth as parents.
Yeah.
And that deep love they have for their children. They wanted them to be happy, fulfilled, no matter what path they chose.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some of the key takeaways that stood out to you?
For me, it's that reminder that parenting is this ongoing journey. It's about learning, adapting, letting go. There's no one right way to do it.
Absolutely.
It's about being present, listening to your children, supporting them as they navigate their own unique path.
So well said. And it's a journey that's shaped by so many things, our cultural experiences, our personal values, the world around us. This book offers such a valuable glimpse into that journey, highlighting both those universal challenges and the unique nuances that immigrant families face.
It's a story of resilience and adaptation, and above all, that unwavering love that guides parents as they try to give their children the best possible start in life.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you some food for thought, maybe even some inspiration. What resonated with you, and how can we all apply these lessons to create more understanding and support for immigrant families in our own communities? That's something to think about.
It is.
Until next time.